Hello and welcome to your Grow Groups this week. My name is Jessica and we are so happy to have you gathered together as we're in week 2 of our series, The Bible Never Said. We're talking about some phrases that people use commonly and that kind of sound biblical but aren't quite there, and digging into what that means for us in our lives. So I'm joined today by Pastor Jess. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
Good. So glad that you're here. You know, it's like today's phrase, everything happens for a reason. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Ugh. It sounds like it should be from the Bible, but it's really not.
Right? It feels close.
Right.
So we're going to start with a fun one that I think some people have said this to.
Okay.
So if you won the lottery,
okay,
what's the second thing you would do?
Ooh. I'd like to say I would be like super generous and like give some away, but I don't know if that would be like the second thing to do. Probably the second thing I would do is probably like set up like this sounds really parenty, but like set up education funds for my kids so like they're set and they don't have to worry about that. Yeah, like probably like invest some of the money. Because the first thing I would do is go like buy some really stupid stuff. Probably like comic books and action figures and sneakers. That's the first thing. So second thing would probably be like properly invest. Does that make sense?
I do like the fun stuff and then the responsibles.
Right. And then like maybe a tight third would be like generosity. Like figure out how to be the most generous with it.
Again, it sounds biblical.
Sounds biblical. Oh wait, first fruits. The first thing I would do would be generous. The second thing is invest. The third one is buy sneakers.
Yeah, of course. I think at first I'd be just crazy excited.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Oh my gosh, what do we do? But I think my second thing would be just like immediate concern or worry or like panic. Like, how do I pay these taxes to make sure I don't go to jail?
Right.
What do I do with it? What am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, there's like statistically people who win the lottery, if they don't manage money well, like it doesn't change. The amount of money doesn't change. It just becomes like even a more burden. Right. So find some financial help if you win the lottery.
Yeah.
Right away. First thing you do. Right.
Good. So we're talking about how some people say everything happens for a reason.
Yes.
Has anyone ever told you that phrase, and what did it make you think or feel?
I've heard it lots of times, right? Like people said, oh, everything happens for a reason. And it's typically followed up, at least in my experience, somebody will say, and sometimes that's because you're dumb. I know, right? For me, and I don't know if that's a personal issue or not, but it might be. But it's like sometimes we do things that, everything happens for a reason, and sometimes it's because of the things we do. But I really don't like that idea of, there are consequences, certainly, and accountability is important in our lives. But when we look at that from the biblical perspective, from the Christ-like perspective, I think it's really dangerous because it's not good theology. And so when people have said it to me, it has made me feel like maybe God's against me. Because typically when they say it, it's something that's not a positive thing that's happened, right? I mean, it's like, hey, you won the lottery. Everything happens for a reason. It's like, okay, people don't say that. People say yay and they celebrate. But when something happens that's traumatic or that's like heartbreaking or that hurts us or hurts other people around us, people are like, oh, well, everything happens for a reason. And that's not only is it not helpful, it didn't help me when I heard it first. It actually hurt because it made me think, well, God's intentionally doing this. And that was not helpful at all.
Yeah, I think the times I've heard it the most were when I lost my job unexpectedly, because then I was unemployed and uninsured in a global pandemic, and I thought, what is this reason?
Right.
Like, what could possibly happen in here?
Right.
And even, my parents got sick and passed. Like, why do we think this is a phrase that we can be using?
Right.
Like, why does God hate me? Is how that makes you feel.
Right. It is. It's I mean, having been in the military and having been a veteran of Iraq and having people who I cared about killed in combat, and oh, everything happens for a reason, and it's like, no, that's not helpful to me right now, and it's not good. It's not a good theology or a thought process.
Mm-hmm. It's a very disconnected God.
Yes.
It feels like this happened for a reason.
Yeah.
And my hands are free. But what we want to remember and what we're really talking about this week is that God is with us.
Yes.
Even in the good, in the lottery winnings, in the bad, in times of war and in times of loss, God is with us. So I'm curious, what are some ways that you see or experience God's presence in hard times?
So a pastor, mentor, friend of mine, Reverend Sue Mitch, who's a United Methodist pastor, once said to me that God is with us even in the mess. And I actually have a small placard that I made to remind myself of that, because I think that's one of the things that's important, is realizing that in the messiness of our lives, God's presence is still there. And it doesn't, again, the idea of like, oh, this happened for a reason. I don't need to hear that. What I really need is presence. And the way I feel God's presence the most as an extreme extrovert is I like to feel God's presence through other people, through other people's presence in my life. And so when people show up, and actually, when I had surgery a number of years ago, and the pastor of the church I was serving at the time, she came and she sat by my bedside, and I didn't really want visitors, but it's such a great opportunity for me to receive care. And I think that's something, again, as Christians, we're often told to like give care, but we don't think about receiving care. And that care might just be simply somebody being with us. And so for me, I feel God's presence the most when I am around other people who are trying to show and share that blessing with me.
Yeah. People with God help offer that presence.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's looking back and remembering the times that God has been with me. Yeah. Some dangerous waters there. It's not that those things have happened to remind me of God's presence. I'm not offering a retrospective reason to those. But it's easier for me in that way. And so I've adapted this silly, like, visual of, I've been thinking of like Mario Kart.
Okay.
So if you've ever been playing Mario Kart, it's like impossible to fall off these roads, right?
Right.
And so you like go off this ledge, and it's just, if we were in real life, like there's this panic, right? But this next road always picks you up. Yep. And I'm like, well, God has done that. Yep. Something has always picked me up. I don't stay flailing in the air for very long. Yep. And so for me, that's when I'm like, God's presence is here, because I know I can't fall off this rainbow road. Right. The music is still playing.
Right. You get picked up and put back on.
Right.
And there is something, I love that metaphor that you share, because for so many of us too, in those moments where we seem like we're off the road, it can feel like it's like we're overwhelmed and we're anxious and we're worried and concerned. And like you said, but we're still put back on the road. And it's like, wow, there's this, it's a great metaphor. I mean, it's a great metaphor. Yeah,
every time it just keeps popping back up. It's done it so many times that I'm like, I feel God's faithfulness. I feel God's presence through God's faithfulness. Yeah. That's so great.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm thinking about it now. It's like every time I've ever got off the road, there's always this like, whoop, whoop, and you're back on. And I'm like, whew.
We're doing it.
Right, we're doing it. We're still on. We're still going. That's right.
Yes. So it may not be that everything happens for a reason, but God is always with us.
Always
that
present.
is biblical.
Always present.
That's true.
Yes. And again, I think that's one of the things that Scripture, the overarching theme of Scripture from Genesis to Revelation is literally God pursuing us, God's presence with us. And no matter how far off the road we get, God is always pursuing us and then getting us back on the road, trying to provide us, this is the path, this is the way, right? And I think that's something that is, I mean, we just have to recognize it. Mm-hmm. It just takes us being able to say, I see it, God. I recognize you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm glad you're here with me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here with me.
Yes. Well, we're glad that you're here with us this week, Jess. Thank you so much for being a part of our Grow Groups.
Thank you.
Thank you all for gathering together this week. Continue to pray for one another, have some great discussions about these questions, and let's learn how to say more biblical and life-giving phrases to one another. So we can't wait to continue this conversation with you next week in The Bible Never Said. We'll see you soon.